Hi, welcome to Board Gems. Welcome to my weekly video series in which I cover an older board game that I happen to think is a gem, and the game I'm covering this week is definitely on the older side. This first came out, I think, in 1990, and I'm going to try my best with the pronunciation. I don't speak German. We're looking at this side of it. This version I have has two games inside. We care about this game, the one on the left, Igel Ärgern. Now, it was designed by Frank Nestel and Doris Mateus. Frank and Doris was published by them. The box says 2 to 6 players and 30 minutes. The time range depends on number of players. A 4-player game or even less, yeah, absolutely you could play in 30 minutes. The more players you have, the longer it will take. It is probably best in the middle player count. 4 is better than 3 and 5. 3 and 5 are probably better than 2 and 6. And the box says ages 8 and up. Absolutely younger kids could play, but you might want to look at some variants. And variants are what make this game famous, because the basic game is very basic. Certainly great in a family setting. It's an old-fashioned roll the dice, move your mice kind of game. But it can be a lot of fun. There's just a hint of strategy, enough certainly that little kids can grasp. And it's got a bit of take that, which is always fun. And variants, people have loved this game in the past, and so they've come up with lots and lots of variants. I'll cover some a little bit later. I usually see this translated as hedgehogs in a hurry. And hey, I always appreciate alliteration. From my limited understanding of German, I think a better translation might be hedgehogs to harass. And you still keep the alliteration. Harassing because it's a little bit of a take-that game. It's a very simple racing game. On your turn, you might be able to move other players' hedgehogs into pits where they get stuck for a while, and you can put your hedgehogs on top of other hedgehogs, which you'd think would hurt them, but actually it just traps the hedgehogs underneath. So it's a little bit of a take-that kind of feeling game, and it has been popular enough over the years, 30 years now, that over the years, tons and tons of variants have come out from people who love the game and want to make it even better. What I'll do is I'll show you how it plays, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about some of my favorite variants. In particular, the variants that you can play with the pieces in the box. There are lots of variants where you add more dice or add like a deck of cards or something. I'm not going to worry about those. But just in the box, some variants you can try. There's tons of them out there. I'll mention some of my favorites, and then I'll talk about why it's still a gem today. To set up the game, each player gets 4 hedgehogs of a single color, and there's a die that will be shared among all the players. The goal of the game is to have all your hedgehogs start at the start column and be the first to get 3 of your 4 hedgehogs to the finish line, this Ziel column here. So in turn order, everybody puts down a piece, but you don't stack a piece on top of another piece until all the other spaces are filled. A turn consists of 3 things: rolling the die, then optionally moving one of your hedgehogs sideways 1 lane, and then moving any piece that's in the matching lane forward 1 space. So let's say blue goes first. Blue rolls the die. At the end of their turn, they will have to move one of the pieces in this lane, the 4 lane. In the case of a stack, the only piece that can be moved is the piece on top. Everything else underneath is, at the moment, trapped. So right now, green would be the one moving forward. But before you move a piece forward, you may take one of your pieces that's able to move, so again, not one that's underneath or lower down in a stack, but something that's on the top of its stack or by itself, and shift it sideways 1 lane. Blue's only piece is here. Blue could shift it to this lane or this lane, but it won't help in this case. But for example, if blue had rolled a 3, blue may want to do this instead. Blue may, before moving one of these pieces, which in this case would have to be the red piece, blue could shift this piece in the 2 lane 1 lane over.
to the 3 lane. And now, move 1 piece forward. Blue would of course choose to move their own piece, and it would look like that. You'll notice these black spaces, these are pits. A piece in front of a pit is in a dangerous position because any player who rolls that number can choose that piece to move forward. And when you move forward into that pit, the piece is now trapped. You cannot move this piece, it is stuck. Only when all pieces have reached its column or further, so it's tied for last, then the pit can be treated like a normal space, and players can move out of it. Keep in mind, pieces can also stack inside the pits. So even when this pit frees up, all the pieces are in this column or further, yellow is still trapped. Basically, the pit just becomes a normal space that pieces can still be stacked in. Once a piece reaches the final column, the finish line here, then it just stays there, or you can leave it to the side. And the first player to get 3 of their markers across the finish line wins the game. That's it. You're ready to play Igel Ärgern. Now, the thing about Igel Ärgern is that there are so many variants for this game. This has been a popular game for 30 years. And over the course, as you can see, the game is very, very simple. It's a very simple racing game. Lots of players, lots of fans of this game have come up with their own variants. Certainly the huge number of variants that are available for the game does add a lot of longevity to this game. Now, there's tons of them, dozens of variants. I'm going to list 1 dozen. These are a dozen of my personal favorite variants, and they're ones that don't require additional equipment. So you can just play out of the box. The first one, and this is the most common variant by far, and that's the doping variant. So each player has 4 pieces. And the winner is the first player to get 3 of their pieces across the finish line. Well, in the doping variant, the first piece that crosses the finish line is immediately eliminated because it was obvious that they were doping. I like to picture a roided up hedgehog. Of course, the player is not eliminated. They have 4 pieces, they would still have 3, and they have to win with those 3. And the effect is that players don't want to rush to the finish line. They want to try to make sure most of their pieces can kind of catch up. So it kind of encourages the games to be a little bit closer. This next variant I've seen called fizzy lifting, which is a little bit, I don't know where that name came from. But if there is the situation where all of a player's pieces are trapped, so for example, if you look at blue here, blue has no pieces that are available to move. In this case, blue is able to jump to the top of one of its stacks. So blue would pick one of their stacks, and they can't pick a stack if they have other stacks in which their piece is lower. So one of the pieces that has their lower piece in it, the lowest possible, and they take their stack and they just jump to the top of the stack. It is possible for a player to be in a stack more than once, in which case a variant can be used called the sandwich variant. As long as, in this case, blue is on the top of its stack, but it also has 1 piece underneath. In this case, you can just move the blue piece on top, but you can also move the sandwich. So you take the top piece, and then the same player's next lowest piece, so in this case this. If there were more than 2 blue pieces, you just do the top 2. And you move those 2 and everything in between forward 1 space. In the normal game, it's not as good to be in lanes 1 or 6, because of the ability to shift sideways. You're a little bit disadvantaged there compared to in the middle. Well, a simple variant, which has been called the tube variant, is that picture this is a cylinder. And the 1 lane and the 6 lane are actually adjacent. You can sidestep into each other's lane like that. So one option is the flying start. This is potentially pretty good if you have lots of players, though you might want to add the doping variant to it to prevent somebody from racing to the win. The idea is you don't set up all your pieces at the beginning, you only set up one piece, and then you have what's called a flying start. When you roll the die, you can either move a piece on the board or bring in one of your own pieces into the lane that you just rolled. So in this case, blue would enter there. In this variant, just note that if a piece gets trapped in a pit, they don't have to wait for all the pieces to pass, just the ones that are on the board. I guess hedgehogs are known to carry apples. So there's the apple variant, or the apple race variant. The idea is, of course, each player has 4 hedgehogs. Players will play with 3 of them face down. In this edition, one side is blank and the other side has a hedgehog in it. This is the apple-carrying hedgehog, or I like to think of it as the spiky hedgehog. And you play the game normally, with a couple of exceptions. This piece is always the last to be placed on the start line. You still win if you get 3 of your pieces to the finish line, but one of them has to be the face-up piece. Now, blank pieces can be stacked upon and can stack themselves. The face-up pieces, the spiky hedgehogs, they can get on top of other pieces, but no piece can go on top of them. Too spiky, it hurts. If you're playing with 2 players, you'll probably want to use 2 colors per player. This is called the big family variant. And in this case, one player wins if they get all 3 of the same color of theirs across the finish line. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. This variant is good for literal big families. If you're playing with a lot of people, like 6 people, you want the game to go a little bit faster. This is faster game number 2. In this game, instead of having 4 pieces each, and the winner is the first player to get 3 of them to the finish line, each player has 3 pieces, and the winner is the first to get 2 across the finish line. By the way, faster game 1 is play with 4 and win with 2, but I prefer this one. And again, only with a large number of players. You see this track, you can play this way, but of course you can play this way too. You can start at the zeal and finish at the start. And you can do both. That's the marathon variant. Players start normally here at the start line, but when a player has a piece and it reaches the finish line, instead of being locked in as a winning condition, instead you flip the piece over. And now that piece's forward movement is that way. So you'll have pieces going this way and pieces going this way. And of course, they can stack on top of each other, trapping each other. Normally in a game, these pits are almost considered bottomless, in that any number of pieces can fall in to a pit, and they get stuck there. Until all pieces reach the same column, and then they can move. But of course, in this case, green and red are still trapped by blue. They have to wait for blue to move off before they can start their movement. Instead, you can play with shallow pits. Each pit is the height of exactly 1 hedgehog. That is to say, if a piece goes into a pit, that pit space then becomes a normal space, and other pieces can go on top of it and treat it just like a normal space. This actually is pretty good because it speeds the game up a little bit, and it keeps people from being too trapped. So if somebody falls into a pit, it's faster to get everybody to them to the same lane, and easier for them to come out. The pits feel a little bit less punishing. An even less punishing version of the pits is that they're not pits at all. You could play with their normal spaces, but that's a little drab. Instead, you can play them as if they're blocks, concrete blocks. You simply can't enter them. You have to go around. That's actually recommended when you're playing with little kids. It's a simple game. You can definitely play the game with little kids, but they could get a little sad and cry maybe if their pieces keep falling into the pits. Instead, you can treat them as blocks, and they're just spaces that you can't enter. You have to race around. There's a dozen variants there for Igel Ärgern.
Little story, I imported this close to around the time it came out, and it was missing a piece. So I remember contacting Doris and Frank and requesting a replacement. And, you know, I felt pretty bad about it because I don't think they expected many people from Canada to import it from Germany. So they would have to mail it. I think I offered to pay for shipping. I usually do for situations like that. With the missing disc, I got a little doodle from Doris Mateus. Now, Doris Mateus is most famous as an illustrator. She was co-designer of this game along with Frank Nestel, but she's most famous as an illustrator, and she has illustrated so many board games from the 90s and 2000s, that era. So she's most famous probably for Carcassonne, and they changed the illustrator more recently, but for at least 15 years, the Carcassonne artwork, the artwork that came with the game when it became famous, was Doris Mateus's artwork. And she worked a lot with other Hans and Gluck titles like St. Petersburg and El Grande. She's also done Elfenland and the Zoc family of chicken games. Pre-mid-2000s, if you were to ask me to name a board game illustrator, I could probably name two. And one of them was Doris Mateus, the other being Franz Vohwinkel. Now, of course, the artwork in this game is really charming. It's a charming little game, and it works great for kids along with adults. It's a really, really simple game to play. Really simple. So much so that, okay, there's not a whole lot of strategy to the game. It's more the type of game where you just kind of see what happens, you know? It's kind of it's an event, you get together, you play, and you roll dice, and something happens in the end. In the end, somebody wins, but you don't feel bad if you didn't win, because it's as much the roll of the dice than anything else. You can definitely lose on purpose in the game, so there is strategy to not lose, or to do the best you can to not lose. But, you know, a serious strategist is not going to enjoy this game all that much. You know, we used to talk in terms of, I don't know if people do this anymore, but in terms of openers and closers. Also, you can think of it almost like if you have like a gaming session, like an evening session. Often we'll have like main course games, right? If you think of it like a meal, you think of the main course, which are kind of the bigger and longer and more kind of strategic games. But you would have appetizers and desserts. You'd have openers and closers. The openers being short games, but that start the brain cells working. They're not like mindless fun. They're fun, but they're setting your palate for what's to come. So the super fillers are great for this. The shorter, thinkier games, a lot of which I cover on this channel, could be considered openers. And then you have closers. The closers are the dessert. It's just the silly fun to cleanse the palate at the end of the night, and you're just left with a warm feeling inside and a smile on your face. And Igel Ärgern is definitely a closer. It's great fun as long as you know what you're getting yourself into going in, right? It's not a strategic game. It's probably best compared to a contemporary game that came out just a year or two before Igel Ärgern, but my much bigger publisher, Ravensburger, Ave Caesar, which was the first board gem. Now, Ave Caesar is probably my favorite game. So if I'm going to compare this to Ave Caesar, I'm going to choose Ave Caesar. But I will say that Ave Caesar is better with more players. Don't bother playing it with 3. With 4, I enjoy it, but not everybody might. 5 and 6 is great. And instead of being at that end of the spectrum, Igel Ärgern is more in the middle. It's a Goldilocks game, really. And again, I've talked about it a lot, but just to cover the basis, I have to explain every time. A Goldilocks game is a game that doesn't really scale for number of players, and so is kind of ideal in the middle ground. And at the lower player counts, it's much easier to do what you want, and on the higher player counts, it's much more challenging and harder to do what you want. Usually for hobbyists, that means you want to go the middle or more players. I wouldn't say that's the case with this. 4-player is best, I think. I don't think there's much doubt about that. Now, you can definitely play with 3 and 5, and it's basically the same experience. But when you get to the extremes, when you get to 2 and 6, then you want to start looking at variants. And oh my goodness, you can't talk about Igel Ärgern without talking about the variants. This has been a popular game for a very long time. But over the course of the years, people have played this game and they've loved it, and they've done variants. They've come up with their own variants, and the variants will either increase a little bit of the decision making, or just increase the fun factor, or just increase the chaos, because sometimes you just want to, if a game is already chaotic, sometimes you just want to lean into that, right? Just make it a crazy mess. This edition that I have here, I mean, it comes with like 40 variants in the box. So some might be tempted to think that, oh, that must mean the game isn't all that great, that you need variants to fix it. It's like, no, it's not about fixing it. Early days in the hobby, there were much fewer games then than there are now. Nowadays, if I play a game and I don't like it, I'm just not going to play it again. I'm not going to try to tweak it to make it better. But back then, if you liked a game, but it was short on perfection, you didn't have a lot of choices for other games. There weren't a lot of other games that were like Igel Ärgern. So if you already like it, but you have some slight problem with it, or at least it's just not perfect for you, you want to tweak it, to change it, to make it better, a better fit for yourself. Because this game is great, but for me, it would be even better if it was like this. And so a lot of games from the 90s in particular have like a lot of variants. Igel Ärgern has more variants, more official variants than I've practically seen in any game. And the variants do lots of different things. Like some of them increase the decision-making factor. So for example, there's some where instead of rolling one die, you roll two and you choose the result, that kind of thing. Sometimes even people will replace it with a hand of cards, right? So again, it's a little bit like Ave Caesar, where you have numbers on the cards that you're playing instead of dice. And again, yeah, these will increase the strategy. I didn't cover those because they require extra components, and I've never felt compelled to do that. I like Igel Ärgern right out of the box, but some of the variants just elevate it. But the basic game is really, really simple. Really simple, okay? There isn't really a lot of strategy. The decisions might seem fairly obvious, and sometimes you'll roll the dice and there's nothing you can do on your turn. The game can kind of slow down at the end because there's fewer hedgehogs on the board, and so there's more likelihood that you roll the dice and you just don't do anything, right? And that's still your turn, and then you're rolling again, and right, or the next player is rolling, and then you almost having a roll off, see who can get the number that you need first. It's not crazy bad, right? It's not like snakes and ladders or chutes and ladders, where you're trying to land on the final space by exact count, otherwise you're stuck there, right? Just artificially lengthening the game, artificially keeping the game close, giving players a chance to catch up. It's not like that so much. Although I will say that, in my experience, games have been really, really close. And there's a few reasons. So even just within the game, just within the basic rules, the game is kept really close, because if you have a choice of which other player's piece to move, often you'll move the player in last place. Either because, you want to stall the game, to keep players who are closer to winning from getting even closer to winning. But also somebody coming from behind can, of course, stack on top of hedgehogs in front of them, which will trap them. So already it's really good that way, and that it kind of keeps games close. But then you throw in the doping variant, which eliminates the first piece that crosses the finish line. And now it's like, well, that's even closer, right? Because nobody wants to cross or even get close to the finish line. So they kind of get a little bit far away, but they also want to keep their guys in behind, not have them too far back. So let's bring them up, and it makes the game even closer. So often exciting finishes, although, as I said, because it's based on dice rolls, and you need particular dice rolls in order to move your pieces forward, it's sometimes at the end it can kind of just slow down and become a little bit of a roll-off. But it is a super simple game that kids can play. Now, any game in which you can hurt somebody is a double-edged sword when you're playing with kids, because kids don't like to be hurt, especially by adults. But oh boy, do kids love to hurt other people. So I encourage you, if you're an adult and you're playing with kids, this game is great, but don't pick on the kids. Don't hurt them, right? If you have a choice of whom to move, you'll move the non-kid piece, put them into a pit if you can, right? If you have a choice. And the kids, let the kids throw you into a pit and then, you know, complain and have a laugh, right? Oh, how could you do that, right? That's going to be fun. Still, kids, if they consistently get picked on, I could see like little kids getting upset. But for slightly older kids, so maybe 7, 8 years up, totally fine. And it's a lot of fun. And if you're worried about it at all, if you 6-year-olds could absolutely play it, but you may want to consider changing the pits to blocks, concrete blocks that are just walls that you have to run around. There's still obstacles, but there's less likely for disappointment. If they ever did make a new version, what I would like to see is some of the official variants incorporated into the main rules. Now, the basic game is the basic game, and in some ways that shouldn't change, but there's just so many variants now, and you don't know which ones work well together. There has been a lot of work on this. I think the game cabinet had like a chart. I've seen it somewhere anyway, a chart that's like, oh, these variants are good with these ones and at these player counts, and this makes the game longer, or this makes the game shorter, right? But I will say some of the variants are great, and I would almost go so far as to say they should be incorporated into the main game rules, but which ones, right? I would love it if Frank and Doris revisited this game, took a lot of the more popular variants, including ones that they think work best for it's still a work of art, right? They've made this game, and they know what feel they want the game to have when people play it. But they already know a lot of variants. They could incorporate their favorites and the ones that they think work best, either for different player counts or just for creating the experience that they want to give players. And to come up with a new version, you can still have the basic version in the box, but then also have the official version that has a couple of the variants mixed in, and that will be considered the official way for hobbyists to play. Because when you have 40 variants and you get a bunch of people together who've already played this game, they all will have played different variants, and they might disagree as to which variant should we play with, right? And that's why I do like there to be official rules. I don't mind variants, and I don't mind in particular to have a mix of like, here's a basic game and here's a more advanced game, right? So I would love for them to revisit this. But out of the box, it's a great game. And of course, with the included variants, there's tons of replayability, and you can tweak the game a lot just to make it the perfect experience for you. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Igel Ärgern don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.